The call came through on an overseas line at 2 a.m., which should have been my first indicator that the news would be transactional, not personal. I was halfway through a 6-month deployment in Tokyo, handling the kind of complex financial restructuring that demands all of your attention, leaving none for the mundane worries of home. The number was blocked, but the woman on the other end, a mortgage closer named Brenda, spoke with the distinct, clipped urgency of someone who needed a signature by 5 p.m. to make her quota. She had me verify the address of the house, my house, the one my mother had left to me, free and clear, just 2 years prior. A house I had poured all of my inherited financial acumen into protecting, viewing it not as sentimentality, but as my single largest, most stable asset. Brenda's tone shifted from procedural to puzzled. She asked why I was attempting to halt the finalization of the mortgage loan when I, as the current owner, had just signed the disclosure documents with my cousin, Derek, acting as my authorized representative. I felt the familiar, cold knot tighten in my stomach, the one that always forms when a human variable attempts to corrupt a perfect system. I didn't raise my voice. I asked her to repeat the name of the representative and the amount of the loan. Derek. $150,000. The line was silent for a moment, not from my shock, but from my immediate, clinical assessment of the data she just handed me. Brenda, I said, my voice deliberately low and devoid of inflection, I am sitting in Tokyo. I have not been in the United States in 4 months. And if you have a document signed by me, or any current, valid power of attorney appointing my cousin, or anyone else, you have been presented with a forgery. The information, once stated, was undeniable, absolute. I had specifically revoked all ancillary POA documents after the passing of my mother, streamlining the legal structure to a single, secure trust. Derek, a low-rent real estate broker with an expensive gambling habit, had apparently gone fishing in the expired paperwork left over from the probate process. He had mistaken my absence for opportunity, and my grief for stupidity. It was a classic move of an opportunist, target the soft perimeter when the owner is distracted. I allowed the conversation to continue just long enough to extract the name of the lender, the title company, and the exact closing time. The objective was not to scream at him on a video call, or to vent to Brenda about family drama, but to secure the initial data points of the crime. Betrayal is merely a legal event, I decided, a triggering mechanism that requires an equally precise and cold countermove. When I hung up, I did not call Derek. I did not text him a furious string of accusations. I simply opened my secure laptop and began to write. The Tokyo night outside my window was quiet, and inside, a new, meticulously organized project had just begun. Derek had chosen to play a game of consequence, and I was, by nature and by profession, the superior strategist. He wanted money and power he hadn't earned, I only wanted order, and the restoration of my legal and financial reality. That, I knew, required him to lose everything he had just gambled on. The priority was to establish a flawless legal perimeter, creating an ironclad structure against Derek's reckless attempt. I didn't care about his motivation, only the mechanism of his fraud. The first call went to Marcus, my property attorney back in the States. He was a man of quiet competence and an even quieter office, the kind of lawyers who dealt in facts and statutes, not courtroom theatrics. I laid out the details precisely, the name of the bank, the closing date, the alleged POA, and the name of the title company. I spoke as an analyst reporting a discrepancy, not as a victim recounting a trauma. My emotional distance, I've found, always makes people take me more seriously. It removes the scent of instability, leaving only the sharp clarity of the problem. He's using an expired power of attorney from your mother's estate paperwork, Marcus confirmed after a few hours of digging through the probate records I'd forwarded. It's a weak foundation for a mortgage, but title companies get lazy. They're assuming the familial relationship is sufficient and that you simply signed off on him acting on your behalf. I was silent for a beat. The laziness of others, especially when combined with financial desperation, always creates a perfect point of entry for systemic risk. Derek hadn't just been opportunistic, he had been arrogant enough to assume I wouldn't have everything legally secured. He had underestimated my control. My instruction to Marcus was simple and absolute: do not contact Derek. Do not send a cease and desist letter. Do not alert the title company that the fraud was discovered. If he knows we know, he will destroy the evidence and find a new angle, I explained. We must allow him to proceed with the entire fraudulent transaction up until the final moment of closing. We need a complete paper trail of his intent, his signature, and the documents he presented. This was not about merely stopping him, it was about ensuring he signed his own financial and professional death warrant. I wanted him to commit fully, believing he was succeeding. While Marcus prepared the necessary legal injunction, a sealed, preemptive document to be filed with the court and delivered to the bank's general counsel at a specified, very late moment, I handled the digital forensics. My field taught me that physical documents can be forged or destroyed, but the digital shadow is eternal. I needed to confirm my suspicion about the intercepted mail. Derek had been collecting mail at the house, mail intended for me, utility bills, property tax notices, and, critically, the preliminary mortgage disclosures. I used my financial contacts to flag every utility account and redirect all mail to a secured P.O. box Marcus had set up. Simultaneously, I accessed the IP logs for my home's smart thermostat and security system. The logs confirmed a pattern. Derek was accessing the house, typically between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., not to live there, but to check the mail, scan documents, and meet discreetly with the appraiser and broker. He had been turning my asset into a clandestine office for his fraud. I took the screenshots of the IP logins, cross-referenced them with the property access codes that only he and I possessed, and sent the entire, dated log to Marcus. This wasn't just theft, it was criminal trespass and a clear demonstration of premeditated intent to deceive. The evidence was now layered, the bank's initial call that served as the hook, Marcus's legal research establishing the expired POA as the mechanism, and my forensic data detailing his physical and digital movements as the proof of malice. The emotional component of the betrayal, the fact that he was my own cousin, a man I'd shared childhood holidays with, had already been neutralized. He was no longer family, he was a counterparty, and I was preparing to execute a hostile takeover of his entire legal position. I felt a quiet, powerful sense of control, the kind that comes when chaos is not fought with emotion, but tamed with data. The next phase required me to act as if nothing were wrong, to maintain the perfect illusion of my unsuspecting distance. My colleagues in Tokyo saw the same reserved, focused financial analyst. They had no idea I was simultaneously dismantling a domestic fraud scheme. This period was the setup, the calm before the structural failure, where I meticulously reinforced my position while observing Derek's deepening commitment to his deception. I knew he was watching my social media, he always did, a habit born of petty envy, so I ensured my posts were deliberately mundane, a photo of a complicated spreadsheet, a caption about the jet lag, a complaint about the unfamiliar currency. Everything screamed distracted and overseas. While I maintained my digital facade, Marcus established the physical groundwork. He filed a quiet title action in the county court, a move that legally affirms my ownership against all potential future claims, but one that remains sealed and invisible to the public until a specific date. This preemptive legal strike was the silent weapon. It made any subsequent action Derek took irrelevant, but because it wasn't served, he couldn't know it was there. He continued to operate in the belief that the title was clear and that his forged documents were his only obstacle. His arrogance was my asset. He wasn't checking the deep recesses of the county clerk's office, he was only focused on the closing table. I called Derek a week later, timing the call strategically. It was late afternoon for him, just when he'd be feeling the pressure of the closing timeline. I used a burner phone and a voice that was slightly, deliberately, tired. I played the naive victim, but one too busy to be effective. "Hey Derek, I got a weird message from a bank about a lien or something on the house. Is everything okay with the utility bills? I'm so swamped here I haven't even looked at my mail." I injected just enough confusion to sound plausible, but not enough to suggest I understood the severity. His reaction was exactly as predicted, instant, condescending confidence. "Oh, that whole thing? Yeah, just a technical snafu from Mom's estate, Nat. The bank is cleaning up some old mortgage paperwork they messed up on. It's totally fine. I told them you're out of the country, and they just need me to sign a release for you to clear the title for them. It's a pain, but I'm handling it. Don't worry your head about it." He even threw in a performative sigh, the martyr by proxy. Cleaning up old paperwork. The audacity was almost impressive. He believed his own lie, which made the subsequent fall that much steeper. I listened, not for the words, but for the tone, the nervous haste, the overly confident dismissal. Every lie he told was a data point confirming his intent. "Okay, good," I replied smoothly. "I trust you. Thanks for handling it, I owe you one." The lie of trust was the final anchor I needed to set. It gave him permission to continue and erased any lingering suspicion he might have had about the initial bank call. We exchanged pleasantries, and I ended the conversation quickly, citing an early morning meeting. He hung up believing he had successfully placated the distant, distracted heir. In reality, he had just confessed his crime and his plan, confirming that he was, indeed, actively working to execute documents that were demonstrably false and misleading to a financial institution, a federal offense. I immediately sent a detailed transcription of the conversation, complete with the timestamp and recording file, to Marcus. This wasn't just intent now, this was an admission secured under false pretenses. The setup was complete. The door was not merely open for him, it was a brightly lit, legally documented path toward his own destruction. My composure remained absolute. The time for emotion had passed decades ago, the time for consequences was arriving. The critical difference between my approach and Derek's lay in our understanding of risk tolerance. For him, the risk was an adrenaline rush, a gamble he had to win to pay off a looming debt. For me, risk was quantifiable, a variable to be controlled and minimized. I was calculating the probability of his success, which, thanks to my preemptive legal and digital maneuvering, was now approaching zero, and ensuring the consequences of his failure were maximized. I shifted my focus from merely documenting his actions to actively manipulating the environment around him without his detection. The next point of leverage was his professional reputation. Derek was a licensed real estate broker, which meant his entire livelihood depended on his adherence to a professional code of ethics and, more importantly, the law. Fraudulently securing a mortgage on a property he did not own, using forged documents, was not merely a family dispute, it was a violation that would cost him his license and expose him to severe civil and possibly criminal penalties. I didn't just want the house back, I wanted to remove the instrument of his opportunism permanently. I contacted the state's Real Estate Commission, using a generic email address and an anonymous tip line. The communication was sparse and factual. "I have reason to believe Derek, last name, is engaged in a fraudulent real estate transaction involving a property at, address, and is using forged power of attorney documents to secure a mortgage." I included no names, no personal connection, and no emotional context. My objective was only to plant a quiet seed of suspicion, a separate, bureaucratic process that would begin to turn the slow gears of professional accountability against him. The commission would start with a low-level inquiry, perhaps an audit of his recent transactions, but the existence of this formal complaint would soon become another layer of evidence against him when the main event unfolded. Concurrently, Marcus worked to perfect the timing of the reversal. The goal was to let the closing proceed as far as possible, to the very moment the funds were about to be wired, because that was the exact point where Derek's liability would be greatest. Up until that point, it was attempted fraud. Once the money moved, it was successful fraud, and the consequences compounded exponentially. We scheduled the delivery of the sealed injunction and the proof of my clear title to the bank's general counsel, not the branch manager, to occur precisely 30 minutes before the scheduled close of escrow. This maneuver bypassed the lazy title officer and Derek's smooth talking, direct to the highest legal authority in the bank, the people who cared most about regulatory compliance and avoiding massive legal exposure. The strategy was simple: Derek would arrive at the closing table believing he had triumphed, ready to sign the final documents and collect his ill-gotten funds. He would believe I was still thousands of miles away, asleep, and unaware. Then, simultaneously, the Real Estate Commission would have been alerted, Marcus's legal papers would land on the General Counsel's desk, and the title company would receive an immediate and unambiguous order to halt the transaction based on irrefutable evidence of a felony. The beauty of the plan was its inevitability. It wasn't about me arguing or yelling, it was about the perfect convergence of legal, financial, and professional consequences. I had weaponized the system he thought he could easily manipulate. The setup was complete, the dominoes were perfectly aligned, and all that remained was for him to arrive at the closing table and execute the final, fatal action I had patiently waited for him to commit. The week leading up to the closing was one of pure, focused tension, a sustained holding pattern where every element of the strategy had to remain perfectly static. I continued my work in Tokyo, appearing increasingly fatigued and detached on video calls, providing Derek with the necessary psychological cushion that I was utterly preoccupied. I wanted him to be certain that the distance was his ultimate shield. He needed to feel secure enough to take the final, irreversible step. This was the period of escalation, not of my reaction, but of his mounting pressure and self-inflicted risk. I tracked the movement of the title company's documents electronically. Thanks to a discreet contact Marcus had leveraged at the state level, a former clerk who understood the system's vulnerabilities, I had a near real-time, low-level view of the file's progress. The preliminary title search, which should have been a red flag for any competent broker, was either intentionally ignored by Derek's associates or genuinely missed, thanks to his fraudulent representation of the expired power of attorney. The documents proceeded as planned, the final commitment letter was issued, the funds were earmarked by the lender, and the closing package was sent to the title agent. Derek was speeding toward the financial precipice, completely unaware that I had installed a perfectly silent, immovable barrier at the edge. He texted me once during this week, a casual message asking if I needed him to drop off any mail. I knew he was gauging my awareness, performing one last check of the perimeter. No, thanks, Derek. Just forward anything important to that P.O. box I set up last month. I'm drowning in Japanese compliance forms. Appreciate you keeping an eye on things. My response was measured, brief, and crucially, non-committal about my actual location or interest level. The P.O. box reference was a tiny, cold barb. He knew about the P.O. box, which was Marcus's address, and he had been intercepting my critical mail before it went there. By mentioning it, I was simply confirming that my life was organized, my mail was controlled, and I had a physical presence handling my affairs back home, a detail he likely dismissed as a general administrative setup. My focus was on the bank call. The original point of contact, Brenda, the closer, was the only person who had initially connected me to the fraud. I hadn't returned her calls since that first night, allowing her initial confusion to deepen into a procedural uncertainty. 2 days before the closing, I had Marcus place a call to her supervisor. The message was subtle, a simple inquiry about whether the file involving my property had been flagged internally due to the representative's use of dated documentation. The goal wasn't to stop the closing, but to introduce a low-grade, official administrative friction. I wanted the supervisor to look at the file, see the questionable POA, and feel a flicker of doubt, forcing them to proceed with an extra layer of caution and documentation. This minor intervention ensured that when Marcus's legal papers eventually landed on the general counsel's desk, they wouldn't be dismissed as a random, last-minute grievance. The file would already have a history of administrative red flags. The tension wasn't mine, it was being meticulously built in the professional lives of everyone supporting Derek's fraud. He, meanwhile, was likely planning his payout, counting the money, perhaps deciding which debt to pay off first, allowing his financial desperation and sense of entitlement to completely eclipse his judgment. He was running a race he thought he could win, but I had already dictated the finish line and ensured that crossing it would result in an immediate, absolute penalty. The stage was set, and the only remaining movement was his final, self-destructive push. The night before the scheduled closing, I pulled an all-nighter in Tokyo. Not because I was nervous, but because I was cross-checking the minutiae of the legal documents Marcus had finalized. My job has taught me that victory is often found in the footnotes, in the dates, and in the perfect alignment of testimony and evidence. I was confirming the chain of custody for the documents that would soon crush Derek's scheme, the certified copy of the clean title deed in my name, the affidavit from me, signed and notarized at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, stating unequivocally that I was overseas and had issued no valid power of attorney, and, most importantly, the printouts of the IP logs and the recorded conversation with Derek. These were the instruments of my quiet, logical revenge. The physical distance between us was the final psychological weapon. Derek had planned his victory assuming I was geographically unable to intervene, that the time zones and bureaucracy would shield him until the wire transfer was complete. He underestimated the modern capacity for remote, meticulous, and decisive action. I coordinated with Marcus for the final delivery. The documents were to be couriered to the bank's general counsel's office, not to the specific title company branch where Derek was closing. This ensured the legal response came from the highest level, a corporate legal order overriding a routine closing procedure. Marcus would also have a certified copy of the quiet title action, the document affirming my ownership, prepared for electronic filing the moment the closing was legally stalled. I even executed a small, final piece of digital manipulation. I used a proxy IP address to access a low-level forum where Derek often sought quick, anonymous advice on real estate shortcuts. I posted a generic, carefully phrased question about the legal risks associated with an expired power of attorney in a quick closing environment, citing a hypothetical relative's dilemma. I didn't need him to respond, I only needed him to read it. The goal was to inject a final, deep spike of anxiety right before he went to sleep, a tiny, self-doubt-inducing seed planted in the environment he trusted most. I wanted him awake and sweating, running the risk scenario through his mind one last time, convinced he had covered every angle, right before he walked into the trap. The hours ticked by. I tracked the courier confirmation on my screen, watching the legal package travel across state lines, a physical manifestation of the net closing around him. The cold control I felt was not the absence of emotion, but the successful redirection of it. The betrayal had been converted into strategy, and the outrage had been distilled into evidence. Derek had viewed the inheritance and the house as an opportunity for quick cash to fix a personal failure. I viewed it as a perfect system, a legal, financial, and emotional perimeter, that he had dared to violate. And when a perfect system is violated, the only correct response is not anger, but restoration, the elimination of the offending variable. As dawn broke in Tokyo, I received Marcus's final, brief text message, package confirmed delivered. We are ready. It was quiet, professional, and entirely without fanfare. The tension was now entirely his. He was about to put his name on a stack of documents confirming a felony, believing he was about to achieve financial liberation. He was walking into the title company office, ready to celebrate a victory that had been dead for days. I shut my laptop, feeling a detached sense of satisfaction. My work was complete. All that remained was the final, devastating, and perfectly logical execution of the reversal. The closing was set for 11 a.m. Eastern Time. For me, in Tokyo, it was a late-night, strategic vigil. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, watching the clock tick, not with anxiety, but with the cold, scientific anticipation of a controlled experiment. Marcus had confirmed the bank's general counsel, alerted by the courier and the pre-filed administrative flags, was now personally overseeing the file. The issue had successfully been escalated past the level of Derek's influence. It was no longer a negotiation with a lazy title agent, it was a legal crisis for a major lending institution. At 10:50 a.m. EST, 10 minutes before Derek was scheduled to sit down, Marcus executed the first tactical maneuver. He electronically filed the affidavit of forgery and non-representation with the county recorder's office. This document, signed and sealed by me in Japan, was now public record, directly contradicting the legitimacy of any power of attorney Derek was about to present. While Derek wouldn't see it immediately, its existence guaranteed that any title search performed after that moment would flag the transaction as fraudulent, securing the legal record. At 11:05 a.m., the call came to the title company's closing agent. It wasn't from Marcus, it was from the bank's general counsel's office. The voice was calm, professional, and entirely absolute. The message, as later relayed to Marcus, was simple: immediate cease and desist order on the file for the property at, address. The transaction is flagged for suspected felony fraud involving forged documents. No funds are to be wired. All documents are to be immediately secured and copied for our legal review. The order carried the weight of a multi-billion-dollar institution protecting itself, which, in the financial world, is the sound of an insurmountable wall. Derek, I learned, had already been sitting at the closing table for 15 minutes, likely radiating the false confidence of a man about to solve all his problems with someone else's equity. He was probably making small talk with the notary, ready to sign the final papers and collect the check he thought was his deliverance. The closing agent, a low-level functionary, would have received the call with a shock of panic, realizing the routine transaction had just turned into a federal legal hazard. The power had shifted instantaneously and irrevocably. The climax was silent, bloodless, and entirely procedural. There was no physical confrontation, no yelling, just the quiet, decisive action of corporate compliance and the rule of law. Derek's entire scheme, built on a shaky foundation of outdated paperwork and his own arrogance, collapsed under the weight of a single, highly placed phone call. The general counsel's order didn't just stop the transaction, it seized the physical evidence. The forged documents, his signatures, and his communication trail with the title company were now locked away, not just as a failed transaction, but as exhibits in a bank's internal fraud investigation. I received a brief email from Marcus: the transaction is dead. The paperwork he signed is secured. He knows nothing of the quiet title yet. The satisfaction wasn't a rush of heat, but a deep, cold settling of order restored. Derek had mistaken my composure for weakness and my distance for incompetence. He had walked into the trap, and the professional system he sought to exploit had become the instrument of his downfall. The check he thought he was collecting was now a warrant for his professional and financial ruin. Derek was asked to step into a side office at the title company, not by the low-level closer, but by the regional manager, whose face was likely a mask of professional panic. He was told, vaguely, that there was a major issue with the title chain and that the closing was indefinitely suspended pending legal review. They would not have disclosed the forgery or the bank's fraud warning. Their primary concern at that moment was legal containment and not tipping off the perpetrator. They simply secured the evidence, politely, professionally, and utterly dismissively. He would have argued, of course. Derek's personality dictated that he could talk his way out of any problem. He would have employed his charming arrogance, insisting that it was a simple administrative error, that I, his busy, distant cousin, had simply forgotten to update some form, and that he was the one trying to fix the bank's mess. But this time, his words found no traction. The authority was too high, the directive too cold, and the risk to the title company too great. The manager would have simply repeated the necessary corporate non-answers: the file is under legal review. We cannot proceed. We must secure all documents. For Derek, the reality would have hit not with a bang, but with a paralyzing confusion. The money wasn't coming. His gamble, his entire lifeline, had been cut, not by a family argument, but by the silent, efficient process of law and compliance. He would have left that office not with a check, but with the chilling realization that a professional system, the system he was meant to be a licensed part of, had actively rejected him. He had been defeated by a paper trail he thought he had controlled. My next move was to solidify the legal fortress. Marcus, now operating on my direct instructions, immediately emailed Derek's attorney, the one Derek had foolishly hired to represent him in the closing, an accessory by association, a certified copy of the quiet title action I had filed earlier. This document informed Derek, officially and legally, that the title was not only clean but had been actively secured in my name against any future claim, and that his attempt to mortgage it had failed, not because of a technicality, but because I had been working preemptively against him for weeks. Attached to that quiet title action was a second document, a formal letter stating my intent to pursue civil damages for attempted fraud, trespass, legal fees, and emotional distress, alongside my decision to file a formal complaint with the State Real Estate Commission. The final piece of the reversal was not just taking back the asset, it was stripping him of the means to ever attempt this kind of fraud again. I was not just reclaiming the house, I was ensuring the complete annihilation of his professional license and financial future. I didn't need to speak to him, The legal paperwork spoke with a colder, more devastating authority than any raised voice could ever achieve. The moment he read those documents, he understood the extent of my control. He realized the weird call I mentioned from Tokyo was not a confused query, but the opening of a trap. He realized I had allowed him to incriminate himself fully, moving from mere intent to the final act of signing the forged documents before pulling the rug out from under him. The climax was complete. It wasn't about vengeance driven by rage, it was about justice driven by data. He had been outplayed, not by emotion, but by superior strategy, evidence, and composure. The game was over, and the consequences were now mathematically assured. The aftermath was a period of calculated, systematic devastation for Derek. He tried to call me immediately after receiving Marcus's packet. The first time in weeks he sounded genuinely panicked, his earlier condescension replaced by raw, desperate fear. I didn't answer. His calls went straight to voicemail, and I listened to the recordings later, analyzing the rapid breakdown of his composure. He cycled through denial, pleading, and finally, a surge of futile rage, the predictable pattern of an opportunist whose easy money has vaporized. I did not need to speak to him to understand his despair. The legal papers I had served him were already doing the talking. The bank, realizing the sheer extent of the fraud risk they had avoided, moved swiftly and coldly to protect their interests. Their legal team filed a police report, citing Derek's attempted use of forged documents in connection with a large financial transaction. This wasn't my revenge, this was the system self-correcting. The bank was not seeking justice for me, they were eliminating their own regulatory exposure. Derek, the arrogant cousin, was now simply a subject in a financial fraud investigation. Marcus handled the professional complaint. The evidence was irrefutable, the certified copies of the forged power of attorney, cross-referenced with my signed, consular notarized affidavit of non-representation, the title company's seized files, and the bank's internal investigation notes. The Real Estate Commission, which values the integrity of the housing market above all else, started the process of summary suspension. His broker's license, the tool of his trade and the source of his current income, was put on a fast track to revocation. He could no longer legally work in the field he had sought to exploit. The family, sensing the catastrophic shift, began to circle. Aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years started calling Marcus, attempting to mediate, using the tired language of family healing and second chances. Their real motivation was transparent, they feared the scandal, the public record, and the legal fees. Marcus, my fortress, deflected them all with calm precision. Ms. Natasha has only initiated legal actions to protect her sole inheritance from fraudulent claims. Any conversation regarding the charges must go through Mr. Derek's defense counsel. I did not have to engage in the emotional fray. I had outsourced the mess, allowing the cold, professional process to take its course while I remained physically and emotionally distant. The fallout was spreading exactly as intended, systemic, thorough, and devastatingly logical. The financial pressure on Derek was immediate and suffocating. He owed his gambling debts, now exacerbated by the need for expensive legal representation against the bank, the state commission, and me. The loss of his broker's license didn't just strip him of future earnings, it ruined his reputation within the local real estate community, the only professional network he had. I had ensured that the damage was not merely legal but existential. He couldn't pivot to another firm, the record of the fraud complaint would follow him. I remained in Tokyo for the duration of my assignment, a full month after the climax. This sustained physical absence was part of the final strategy. It communicated that the fallout was so complete that I didn't even need to be present to enforce it. My physical distance was an expression of my absolute control and detachment. Derek was fighting lawyers, compliance officers, and regulators, not me. My role was reduced to reviewing Marcus's summarized reports, providing sharp, precise instructions, and ensuring the process remained on the track of maximum consequence. One of the last elements of the fallout was the retrieval of my mother's small, heirloom jewelry box that Derek had been keeping at the house, claiming he was securing it. I didn't care about the monetary value, I cared about the principle of complete reclamation. I instructed Marcus to coordinate with the local police, Using the criminal trespass evidence I had gathered from the IP logs and the unauthorized entry codes, to ensure a supervised re-entry to the property. He sent an official notice to Derek demanding the return of all my personal property, listing the jewelry box specifically. When the police supervised the retrieval, a process that must have been a final, humiliating blow to Derek's ego, he tried one last desperate move. He claimed the jewelry box was a gift from our late grandmother. The claim was pathetic, a final, small attempt at financial and emotional theft. Marcus simply presented the original probate documents detailing the precise distribution of all named assets. The box was mine. He had to hand it over in the presence of an officer, a tangible symbol of his complete defeat, forced to surrender the small, symbolic victory he had been trying to claim. The fallout was now entering its final stage. Every piece of his reckless intrusion was being systematically undone, leaving him not just with nothing, but with a massive deficit of reputation and solvency. I finally returned to the United States a month later, not for a confrontation, but for a simple, necessary task, to step back into the house I owned. My arrival was quiet. I flew directly from the West Coast, arriving late at night, letting only Marcus know my travel plans. There was no grand entrance, only the silent click of my key turning the lock, affirming the absolute reality of the title deed. The house was exactly as I had left it, structurally sound, meticulously clean, a perfect asset. Derek had only managed to pollute it with his ambition, a pollution I had now entirely neutralized. The final act of the revenge arc was not just about restoration, but about absolute boundary setting. The money he owed me, the cost of Marcus's legal fees, the time lost, the cost of the digital forensics, was meticulously calculated. I wasn't seeking punitive damages based on emotion, I was seeking complete, demonstrable financial recompense based on his verifiable actions. Marcus filed a civil suit demanding full repayment, attaching all the evidence the bank and the real estate commission had already secured, the IP logs proving trespass, the recorded confession, and the confirmed forged documents. This was not a negotiation, it was a liquidation of his remaining solvency. Derek tried one last time to appeal to our shared history. He left a note taped to my front door, a handwritten plea about the toll this is taking on our family, suggesting I was being too harsh. The letter was thick with self-pity, devoid of genuine remorse for the fraud itself. I crumpled it without reading past the first sentence and dropped it into the recycle bin. The emotional appeal was irrelevant. He had chosen the court system as his battlefield, and I would meet him only with the cold, hard currency of evidence and statute. My ultimate power move was the complete and utter revocation of his access. The next morning, I changed every digital and physical lock on the property. I didn't send him a notification, the new silence was the message. Then, I called the property management company he occasionally used and alerted them, formally, to the fact that Derek's real estate license was under review for fraud, citing the public court documents. This ensured that even if he tried to hide his professional ruin, the local network would know. The ending was achieved not through confrontation, but through the establishment of an order so rigid, so legally fortified, that his presence in my life, and his viability in his own, was now functionally impossible. The system had won, and I was the quiet, composed orchestrator.